Welcome to AmiCast, podcast about Amiga computers. I'm your host, Krzysztof Radzikowski, but call me Krzysztof or Radzik. Hi, and today is next great episode of AmiCast, number 22, and it's very important because we have the completely fresh guy in Amiga world. He's called Eric, and hi Eric.
Hello, how are you doing?
Oh yeah, we are, I think, fine. I'm fine, you fine, and everybody will be fine now because you are really new in Amiga world, so maybe before we jump to Amiga, let's tell us something about your computer's experience in general. Have you used something, I don't know, Atari? Because Amiga, it's now your first one.
Correct. So I can really go back to when I first saw a computer, which was in the late 1970s when my elementary school purchased an Apple II. And that was the time period when, Apple II was brand new. There was almost no software for it yet. And I was obviously kind of spellbound and excited to see this new, machine that would play, text and images on a TV, which I thought was amazing. So I kind of learned how to do just a few things with the Apple II at school. I fell in love with computers. And the first time I was able to actually own a computer was a few years later when the Commodore 64 came out. So that might tell you why I'm somewhat interested in Amiga these days. I was a major Commodore fan all through the 80s and through the early 90s. I never did get into the Amiga, however. When the Amiga came out, I thought it was expensive. So I kind of stayed away from the Amiga. And frankly, when the Amiga first came out, and I think it was 1985, if I'm not mistaken, when that came out and a year before with the Macintosh, I honestly looked at the graphic user interface, the whole mouse and pointer idea, and I actually referred to it as computers for idiots, because I figured if you couldn't use the command line and type what you wanted to do, you weren't a real computer user. So I stayed away from the Macintosh and the Amiga early on, and obviously that changed as time went by. But once I finally started to get, I actually did look at buying an Amiga in I was like the late 80s or early 90s when the Amiga 3000 came out, and I don't know what year that was. But I was looking at them, and I thought that was, the technology was changing. Obviously, the graphic user interface had taken off and had been refined, and I was kind of amazed at what that machine looked like. Mm-hmm. But I never bought one. It was a price thing. I was still, at that time, using my Commodore 64. It was obviously at the end of its life. But it was still allowing me to type papers for college and so forth. So I just kind of stuck with it. But I was saving up for an Amiga at the time. And then I could kind of see the writing on the wall that they were probably not going to survive long. And I was pretty sad about that. Mm-hmm. But I kind of gave up the idea of owning one. And sure enough, Commodore went out of business. And, there's lots of information about what happened after that, and it's still a convoluted mess. But I just kind of kept my eye on it. And I did what everybody else did. I switched to the PC and Windows, and I work in the computer industry and have since the mid 1990s. And one of the things that I had a problem with is once I started to work in the computer industry, computers were always a passion of mine. I like tinkering with computers. I like working on computers. It was always my hobby from, like I mentioned, from when I was in my early years of school when I first saw that Apple II. So I really liked to play with computers. And once I started to work on Windows machines, and I was always fixing them and trying to make them work, and trying to do all this stuff that advanced software does. I'm dealing with servers and networking, and this is the 90s. It wasn't all that easy to do back then. I got tired of computers, and it was kind of sad because my hobby was now no longer fun, because I was fighting with Windows all day long. And the last thing I wanted to do when I got home was turn on a computer.
Yeah.
So I actually switched. I dumped my Windows machines at home in the late 90s or early 2000s and went to Apple. So I went back to where I started and started buying the Macintosh machines. I bought an iMac, and then kind of progressed from there through their laptop line and everything else. And I still use them to this day. I have one of the MacBook Pros that came out last year. Still like them. It's
without touch bar, yeah?
I have the one with the touch bar.
So very nice. It's nice, by the way?
It's a nice machine. I mean, Apple makes really, really fine hardware. And obviously we could talk a long time on that. I think they're trying to do or trying to be something that they're not right now. We could talk about some of their mistakes, but their hardware, I mean, nobody makes hardware like Apple does. It's it's built like a tank. It's all solid build quality. I do like their operating system, but I don't know. I think they're kind of losing their touch. They're trying to be too mainstream. They're trying to almost be like a piece of art anymore. The touch bar is a gimmick. It's fun. It works real well, but I hardly ever use it. So I'm not sure how valuable that is or how long that's going to stick around, but it's interesting. But that's kind of where the Amiga came in. I have been watching the message boards. I was what you'd call a lurker on most of the Amiga.org and so forth for years, just kind of watching every once in a while to see what was going on with both next generation and the classic Amiga line, just to kind of see what the community was doing. And I touched on it briefly a few years ago. I had an old Mac Mini, and I put MorphOS or Morphos or however you say it on that. Yeah. So that was kind of my first exposure to one, next generation Amiga-like operating system. I really didn't care for it too much. Nothing necessarily wrong with it, but part of it was the piece of hardware I was using. It was actually having some problems, so it wasn't very stable. And I've heard that's actually not the case with that operating system, but that was just my experience with it. And I also liked the idea that there was still something going on with the real official Amiga line for what it was. I know there was people making add-on hardware for the classics. Mm-hmm. I know there's been quite a lot of activity on that in the last couple of years with accelerators and video converters and so forth, so you can hook it up to new monitors. I mean, it's kind of cool to see that stuff going on. But I just never bought any of it. I have bought some of those kind of things for my Commodore 64s. I still have those sitting here. I have a Commodore 64 and a Commodore 128 sitting on my desk as we speak.
Very nice.
So you can see I do like my classic machines. But yeah, so I kind of kept an eye on it. And at one point in time, I was thinking real heavily about buying one of the X1000s. And obviously they're not cheap pieces of hardware. By the time I actually got to the point where I figured I was just going to take the plunge and buy one, I could no longer find one. They were out of production and you couldn't get them anymore.
Yeah.
And I really didn't want to buy a used one, so I just kind of stayed away and just kind of watched to see if they were going to make any more. I didn't know anything about the X5000 at that point in time. I tried to find one of the AmigaOne, I don't know if they were X500s or A5, whatever they called them, the lower end ones by, I guess
this is the SAM or SAM, yeah.
Yep. So I was looking for those. I couldn't find any of those for sale either. So I kind of gave up on that. Until the X5000 started to talk about it, and obviously you have one,
Yep.
so you know that they talked about it for a couple of years before it ever finally came out for sale. So I kept watching it and hoping that it would come out, and I would watch the presentations from, I guess it's Trevor Dickinson from AmigaOne, where he'd go around to some of the shows like Amiga West, here in the United States,
Yep.
some of the other ones in Europe, and he would talk about what was coming and how it was, they were trying to get the software ready, and so I kept watching that to see what was going to happen. And once I found out that it was announced, he announced it, I guess, last year at Amiga West, that the boards were ready and that the first kind of preview release of Amiga OS 4.1 was ready to go, and that lo and behold, at the same time, a brand new Amiga store was opening up in the United States. And I think you've actually talked to Amiga on the Lake. I think you talked to Aaron from there.
Yep.
Yeah. So I heard your podcast talking to him, and so I'd already bought your book.
Great.
on Amiga OS emulation, and I've been playing with that. So I did buy a copy of Amiga OS 4.1 Classic Edition and got that working, thanks to your book. A lot of the online tutorials and stuff at the time, I could get it working, but not very well. Your book got it to the point where it actually run. But it's, as you know, you wrote a book on it, it's still pretty slow.
Yeah, this is still not, and I think now for Mac we have even Flower Pot, Yep. But I don't know if maybe the typical FS-UAE emulator is maybe faster. Yeah, but basically it's not native speed or something. Yeah, you can forget it.
No. Yeah, it was a way for me to try it out and kind of see what the OS looked like, knowing that what I was kind of seeing was, obviously it's emulated. It's trying to emulate a whole different processor. The core of that program, the whole UAE stuff, it's an open source fan-based project. And honestly, I think they've done a phenomenal job. But it's still, you're trying to translate code from a modern or modern-ish PowerPC processor to Intel, and that slows things down. So that's kind of when I decided to do it, to buy an X5000 and put my order in with Aaron from Amiga on the Lake and just try it out. So that takes me to where I am now, having one right here.
This is a great story. So basically, somehow we can say you decided to take the most powerful AmigaNG because there was no cheaper alternative, or you decided to have X5000 because it's the best option?
Yeah, so I think it's a little bit of both. One, it was the first one that came out that was available, and I did, like you kind of mentioned early on, look at several times at going the classic route and buying an old machine. But it was just that, you're buying an old machine, you never know what you're going to get. You have to deal with leaking batteries and capacitors that are going bad, and there's things to do to fix that. But I already do that with my classic Commodores already, so I didn't necessarily need another hobby where I was fixing old machines. So, the next generation was kind of neat, thinking I could get a brand new, made today machine running a derivative, enhancement of the old Commodore Amiga operating system. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the X5000 was the first one that was released that I could actually order. I know the 1222, whatever it is coming out sometime. It's getting closer, and it's supposed to be a lot cheaper. But the other part of that is like I mentioned, I do like to try to find machines that I could use as my hobby, since I still work on Windows machines and don't want to play with them at home. So I figured if I was going to take the plunge, the X5000 came out. I wanted to support the people like AmigaOne that are actually investing in time and money to make these brand new pieces of hardware. I felt it was a way to support the efforts of Trevor from AmigaOne and his partners, as well as the software people that were keeping this whole thing alive. So I said, why not? Might as well go all the way, get the best machine I can, hoping that it'll last me quite a while, and it would give me something I could play on for a while. I'm hoping to, learn about this operating system, because I've really never used it, either in the old classic version or in the next generation version. Mm-hmm. I've played around with some of the older emulators and stuff in the past, but really it's just a matter of loading up a disk image and playing a game or two. But I never really learned how the actual OS worked, and that's one of my goals with this machine, is to actually learn how the operating system works, kind of get to know some of the people who are writing new software for it, support them. And I haven't programmed in a while, so I might even learn how to program on this thing and just have some fun with it.
Okay, sounds good. So what I understand, I think what you say, this is, I think, quite important for, let's say, our hobby, because you said that the classic hardware is, and I think from my experience, looks like this. My classic Amiga is more to make it work, something like this, right. So from hardware side, and then software to be nice. But basically, I think in NG world, it's more to let's say to be fascinating in operating system or programs. So at the end of all, when I bought X5000, I was for now I almost don't know what hardware I have there. I know I have Radeon and so on, and SSD disk, but I don't care. Like in Mac, I don't care about hardware. Must be fast, and this is enough. So I can focus on programs, I think. So maybe this is the one basic for people that are asking if the NG is worth to try. Probably yes, because you are focused on software, as I think and understand.
Yeah, you're correct. Especially for obviously the way that we can grow the community is to get more people onto the platform. This, once Commodore went out of business, it's never going to be a mainstream platform again. But there's a lot of people out there, both like me that have been computer hobbyists for a long time. There's certainly a lot of younger kids that are fascinated by both the hardware in a machine as well as software. The Amiga Next Generation is fun because it's certainly community focused, community based. The companies that are still supporting them are small. Mm-hmm. The company that writes the OS, from what I can tell, is pretty tiny. They only have a few developers, which is why it's so slow to get things out. And I know people get a little impatient with them, but there's if they have 2 or 3 people that are doing it in their free time, that's what we get. And you run into some issues. I've certainly had problems with the operating system. I think we all have. It'll lock up once in a while, and certain programs that you try, that especially the older ones, may work, they might not work. I know a lot of people talk about the web browser is not where it should be. It's not bad, but it's not totally state of the art. It's missing some functionality that those of us that are used to firing up a web browser on a tablet or a modern computer, just expect it to work and work with every website. Yeah, it's not there yet. I'm hoping we can get there with a couple of these things. I don't ever expect this to compete with Apple or Microsoft, but if you can get a modern web browser that can get us to 95% or more of the websites and online services that we're all accustomed to using, that'll get us to where you can use it for your daily machine. The next thing I think that, at least for me, is a viable Office suite.
The LibreOffice, yeah.
Yeah, I know that's in beta right now. I'd love to try it. I've asked a few people on some of the Facebook pages and stuff. I know it's there are people testing it right now. So hopefully that comes about. I haven't seen it yet myself, but that will really help, I think, the next generation Amiga, be useful for people like myself and you, who's I know you said you like to use it for as much of your daily computing as you can. That's the two important pieces for your day-to-day operations. Beyond that, it's fun to tinker with the new games that people are releasing, and a lot of them remind me a lot of my days with the Commodore 64. I mean, obviously they're better graphics and so forth, but they're smaller, fan-based games or ports of games, so they're not these big complex. I don't have time for that anymore to play some of these big multi-hour epics. But it's fun to fire up a racing game. I got Amiga Racer on this machine, and just something silly to pass 15 minutes. You can kind of play with it and enjoy it. So it's fun that way.
I can tell you I don't have time to play at all, but 2 weeks ago I bought the new Zelda, and I found playing to play this, and this consuming a lot of hours. It's a great game, but better is not to start so complex game. You have something something like what you have on iPad or iPhone, that is fast games, but basically maybe I will say something about this my approach, because I decided when I will buy the new NG, the most powerful Amiga, I must try to do it as home everyday computer. So basically, from my experience, after let's say it's 4th month about, you can do it, and I'm surprised, for example, that YouTube in Odyssey is quite. I'm really depending my life on Odyssey. So, like I said, the Office options for me is great. Is Google Docs or this Google package, and this you can work with collaboration. This is cool. So you can try if you like, and this is working more or less. But YouTube is working, and other sites like TuneIn for radio is working as well, nice. But for example, Dropbox has now problems. I don't know, from this week or something they change something, and it's the problem of our world, yeah. But right. Basically, I'm really surprised in positive way of this computer, especially that this operating system for X5000 is pre-release, so it's not finished, and there are some problems. But I'm really surprised in good way, because I thought before in December or November that it will be something alpha beta, dying every 1 second, but no.
Right. Yeah. I honestly, it's pre-release. It tells you that every time you boot it up, you get the little pre-release message. But I found it to be quite stable. Unless I'm trying to do something, usually with older software. It seems to just stay running all day long, and it works for me. I do use the Odyssey browser as well. It works with most of the things that I've hit it. I found a few things that don't. Actually, it's interesting hearing that you use the Google Docs and all that. I haven't tried that yet. That's one of the things on my list I wanted to try. So if it's working for you, I'm going to give it a shot and see how it
but
how
you
it
must set up Odyssey, I think, as Firefox 25 version. You will find this. It will be working better. Try it, but it's working. I was editing some text documents between me and the other guys. So with this collaboration, live updates of comments or something like that, it's working. I'm surprised, really. And with X5000, because I had before a slower machine with G4, 1 gigahertz, so Pegasus. The X5000 is enough powerful for now, maybe, that you can use every day, because my old machine, it was too slow to use it in everyday use. Basically too slow.
Yeah, the X5000 is a very, very fast machine. I haven't had any performance issues at all. I also put I don't know, actually mine's not a solid state hard drive, but it's one of the hybrid. So it's got a solid state, some solid state and some real hard drive mechanisms in it. That, and I put a high-end graphics card in it, probably a lot more than I need on this thing. But I haven't had any performance issues. It's a very fast computer. The operating system is, not as power hungry, from what I can tell, as the latest versions of Mac operating system or Windows. So you have quite a lot to work with. And I know the operating system can still be enhanced. This X5000's got, I believe, a dual core processor in it.
Yep.
And I know the OS doesn't support that yet. So half this machine is sitting there not doing anything. And if it works this fast with that, if they ever get the multi-core support working, which I know is on their list, this would be a very, very quick computer to do all sorts of things with.
Let's have a hope.
Right.
They will do it. We said a lot of good words about this computer, but you bought it, and there, I don't know, in US from your shop, because in Europe or from my shop in Germany, there is nothing like quick start or manual or how to start. So, and when I'm the Amiga user, I don't know, with experience, yeah, and you are fresh. So how you started? You power button on or something, and then magic, or because it's hard to start, I think, from scratch without experience.
That's a very good question. So, one, I've been tinkering with computers for a long time, so it wasn't that hard for me to figure it out. There's a lot of things about the Amiga operating system and even how this hardware works that I didn't know, and I still don't know. There's, but honestly, I really relied on the Amiga community, which was one of the reasons I got into this. I mean, not only for my own purpose to kind of play with this, but I kind of realized or felt that the Amiga online community reminded me a lot of the Commodore and early computer clubs, or like I used to run a bulletin board service over here on my Commodore 64 back in the 80s and 90s, and people would talk about their computers and how they worked and help each other. And once something becomes mainstream like Windows and the Mac, that kind of goes away. But with Amiga, I'd sign up on like Amiga.org or Amiga World or whatever, and I'd ask questions. So when I ordered my machine, I went out to Amiga.org. I was one of the ones I spent the most time on, just because people were responding to me so fast. And I said, hey, I just ordered my Amiga X5000, and people were like, wow, great. Let us know if you need any help. And there's a lot of people here that I spoke to on those message boards that gave me some pointers on where to start, what to do when I first got the machine, some software to try, like the Odyssey browser doesn't come installed on the machine. So they said, download this. The two that come with the operating system are old, and they're good to download something better, but that's about it. So that's really what I did. I started off with what they told me to do, got up and running to where it would work, and I could actually use it. And then that's when I started to play. And as soon as I would play and run into a stumbling block, I would go on there and ask. And I know that's how I met you online, was on that same website. Yeah. And there was a couple of other people that had ordered machines from Amiga on the Lake at the same time I did. Meeting up with people like yourself and others on Amiga.org, and then I would start to talk to them on those message boards, and even I started to friend some of them on Facebook, and we would just talk about waiting for our X5000s to arrive, or people that had X1000s were giving me advice on where to start. So really it was the community that kind of got me started, got me to the point where I could feel a little bit more comfortable playing with the system without being totally lost. So that was kind of fun, learning from them, learning from their experiences, and just kind of finding out what they use their machines for. I bought this machine going, well, I know I can play some of the old classic games on it. There's some new games on it. Mm-hmm. There's some new audio players and web browsers and stuff. But what do people actually use them for? How did you get started? And that's just where I started, and really relied on them, because, like you mentioned, there is no documentation. The machine came with a little pamphlet from Amiga on the Lake that they put together themselves. That really was a diagram of the motherboard that they got from AmigaOne, right? So it showed me where all the parts were. Oh, well, that doesn't help me. I don't plan on taking the motherboard apart. So, really the community is what allowed me to get started.
Mm-hmm. But it will be, I think, nice when at least you have some one page with basics and maybe main addresses for example, or to how-tos, because this is really confusing for new guy, and you have experience with computers, but if somebody is completely from different world, it could be Amiga, I think, but maybe yes, exactly. For you, how the Amiga is, what is nice, or how different is from your experience with others operating system and so on, because this is I'm the old guy in Amiga, and most of us, so we know and we get used to this stuff from Amiga. But for the new guy that trying everything from the scratch, how it feels or something.
Yeah, that's obviously anymore, if you're using Windows or Mac OS, navigating around the desktop of the Amiga, which I know they call it Workbench or whatever, but doing that is fairly straightforward. There's nothing that unusual about how the navigation of the operating system works. You can easily find where your programs are. So that hasn't been too hard. Some of the things that kind of threw me off, because I'm not a classic Amiga user, is I didn't truly understand what the whole RAM disk thing was, and the fact that you put stuff in there and you turn the machine off and yes, it's a RAM disk, it goes away. So learning that actually has some cool uses. I've found that I like putting all my downloads in there if I'm just trying something out, and I can uncompress them and have all that junk in there, and once I turn the machine off, it clears itself out. I don't have to throw it all out or delete it. So it's kind of neat. I did rely somewhat on YouTube on how to figure out some of the aspects of it, and there's a lot of stuff that I haven't even started to learn yet. So I still want to learn how the shell works and some of the shell commands. You have all the different tools to kind of manage your files. And I'm totally spacing off some of their names, like the Magic User Interface or whatever they're called. And I haven't even played with any of those yet. So a lot of that is still new, and I still need to learn how to use it. I know you're working on your next, or about to finish your next book on Amiga OS 4. Definitely be getting a copy of that so that I can see what you say about it.
Yeah, but because I wrote it from this point of view for us, maybe new user, because as I said before, I decided that I will use this computer most of my day, of course at home, because in work I have the PC.
Right.
But when I come to my home, I can start Amiga and try to watch YouTube, make a blog or something like this on Amiga. And that's why I was discovering every stuff like video editing, the audio editing, or etc. So it's more or less I try to compress into these books basics how to use every day for every basically task from for example Office. That's why the Google but as well is working Microsoft or Apple iWork. This is working as well, slow but working. So I was taking one part of this from internet till utilities and so on. So I think for the completely fresh guy it can be nice tutorials or something like this, or the ideas how you can, which software for what you need.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm glad there's people out there like yourself that are documenting how this stuff works. I mean, you can find stuff online. People do blog about it, and I've definitely relied on that. Like I said, the community has been very helpful. I've met some really great people that have become my friends now because of jumping into the whole Amiga Next Generation thing. But because most of the users, like you mentioned, they're old timers. They've been using the Amiga since it was a mainstream machine. Yeah. Going next generation is not a big leap for them. They know how the stuff works, so they don't need a manual. They had the manual that came with their Commodore based Amiga back in the 90s or 80s or whatever machine they have. There is no manual for the new operating system. There's no manual for the new machines. You're expected to know. So the fact that you're putting it together in one place, I mean, that's how I was able to truly actually start using the emulators. I mean, I could get them to install, but I really couldn't use them. But your book got me to the point where it made sense, and I knew what to do on how to format the hard drive images and so forth. And that stuff doesn't exist on the X5000. I had to rely on asking people, because one of the first things I did with my X5000 is I wanted to install the operating system from scratch.
Yep.
Well, there was nothing that came with it that told me how to do that. So I asked people online, okay, if I stick in this CD and start installing, when it asks me about the file system for this machine, and it asks me about partition sizes, I mean, what do I do? And people told me, said, oh yeah, make sure you pick this one for the X5000, the next generation file system, and make sure you set up at least a couple partitions. And they told me how to get to the point where it would run. And then you needed some drivers to get the 3D graphics working, and I didn't know where to get those. And so people told me and helped me out.
Exactly, yeah. And there are still some bugs or some misunderstandings in, for example, in warp drivers. So you have the old, the new. So I read the forum that some guys were thinking that the warp 3D Nova is compatible with the old warp, and it's not, but basically for new guy, it is really, I have this, but it's not working. Why? So this is the problems. But I would like to ask you about, because like you said, we old timers, we always saying the Amiga OS is easy system, transparent, easy to set up, to customize. And from your point of view, it's really easy system to, I don't know, make some changes, like users startup, maybe probably you know what is it, or startup sequence. So from completely fresh guy, Amiga OS is easy or not, or can be easy?
I think it actually is easy. When it isn't, if you're used to changing the settings on a Windows machine or a Mac, it's not in the same place. You don't change things the same way. Once you learn where they are, then it is easy. But that required me to ask some questions. There was a bunch of programs that were starting up automatically when I first loaded my computer up, and I had the enhancer pack, and it loaded a bunch of widgets or whatever, like the little clock and calendars and stuff. Well, I didn't want all that on my machine. I had no clue how to turn all that off. So I had to ask people, where do I go to set this stuff? There's no, startup programs control panel like there are in Windows. Well, there is one. I just didn't know where it was. So somebody told me how to go do that. I've certainly been playing with it since then. I've got my little docks set up, and I have an animated background going that came as part of the enhancer pack, which I think is kind of fun. So you can definitely customize it really well. It's actually very easy to do so, but you need to learn how to do it. Even for an experienced computer user like me, you have to know where that stuff is. Once you know, it's not difficult.
Okay, but
it's just knowing where it is.
Mm-hmm. So because I'm maybe not so advanced user of Windows, but I use Windows a lot of years, and for me, for example, I know the register and so on, but this is, in my opinion, for example, complicated, to put changes somewhere. In Amiga OS, when you know where this file is, something like that, you can easy to adopt it, more or less. For example, in startup sequence, more or less which command makes what. In Windows, it's not so easy, for example.
Right. And I think a lot of that is just what you're familiar with, and the Mac operating system is entirely Unix based. So unless you're a Unix guy, getting under the hood on a Mac computer is actually very difficult. I mean, the basic stuff people do is easy, but if you want to get really under the hood on a Mac, you need to know Unix, and not everybody does. Windows, I've been using it professionally for a long time, so I know where those files are. I know how to edit the registry and all that stuff that's not easy to learn, but once you know where it is, it's not hard for me to do it. On the Amiga, it's obviously different. It's in a different place, but once I know where it is, I agree with you. It's actually very straightforward and very simple, but it's not in the same. Obviously, it had a different design evolution than the Macintosh or Windows machines. So its design is different, and you just have to know where that stuff is. And I still have a long way to go to learn. I don't know. Like I said, I don't know a thing about the shell commands. I've clicked on it, and I've seen people do a couple of them. I can pull up a directory on the shell. I think that's about it. So there's a lot of things I still want to learn on how to use this machine more effectively and have a lot more fun with it.
Okay, I have one good question maybe, because in Amiga now and before we used a lot of, for example, directory Opus 5. I don't know if you're familiar with this software, because it's more advanced file manager, but a lot of people, old timers, are saying that the Amiga Windows system, so Workbench with this separate window politic. It's not so easy to use, or it's you must close Windows every separate. There is no like Windows Explorer, this stuff, the go back arrow or something. And from your point of view, because this is interesting, this is as well completely different approach that has Mac or Windows, yeah?
Yeah, very much so. And honestly, I do have Directory Opus installed on this, and that's one of the areas I don't understand real well. It's definitely looks like a powerful file manager, but it's not something that I have learned how to use. So that's something I want to play with and learn. Moving files around through the windows. That's what I've been doing so far. Mm-hmm. It's certainly not the most elegant solution because, you have a lot of windows open. You have to move them kind of by hand, and I'm doing the, right click and copy and paste and so forth. And I know that's why those programs exist. So that's something I need to learn how to use. I know that there are a lot of tools like that make the experience better, but I need to learn how to use them.
Okay, so what are you using on your Amiga? Which software can you say already? Directory, and it's cool program, but there's a lot of to learn because to use it effectively, but it is really powerful. Odyssey, you said as well. So there are other interesting software on your computer.
So I've definitely been asking people's advice on what to install on the machine, just so I have stuff to play with. For just taking notes, which I do when I'm here at home for work. I do fire up just some of the ones that come with the machine, like the notepad. I have installed Cinnamon Writer to do some basic word processing. Still looking forward, like I mentioned, to getting LibreOffice at some point. Mm-hmm. I do use the Odyssey browser, like we talked about. I belong to a couple of IRC channels that I hang out in quite a bit during the day. So I have Wookiee Chat loaded up, and that seems to work quite well. So I use that a lot. Music programs like Amiga Amp and so forth I have installed. What else do I have on here? I've loaded up some of the developer tools like the SDK and CodeBench, but I honestly haven't had time to dive into that yet. And like I mentioned, I'm an old school Commodore guy, so I do have the Vice emulator loaded up so I can run Commodore 64 software on my Amiga. It just seemed appropriate. What else do I have on here? I think that's about it, besides some games. I have been playing with some of the simple games. I have Amiga Racer, some of the ones from, I think, Cherry Darling, which are like Voxel Bird and Voxel Noid and so forth. Mm-hmm. I did finally get Gorky 17 running. Haven't had a chance to really dive into that yet. That had issues with the operating system on this machine. And you mentioned the 3D drivers. That threw me off for about a month because I thought for sure that the new version of Warp 3D Nova was backwards compatible. And like you said, it wasn't, so I had to buy the other one too.
Surprise!
But, yeah, it's like, why did you give it the same name? But whatever. So I have both of them running. That solved that problem. That's what I've got on here so far. I play a few simple games. I use the web browser. I chat with people on IRC, listen to online radio, and kind of go from there. Besides that, I've just been kind of playing with the operating system and trying to learn how different parts of it work, which has been fun in and of itself.
Okay, so basically, do you think we can use, or if somebody is interested in buying the NG Amiga and would like to use it more every day than Classic, because Classic you cannot use every day. Yeah, there's basically for the first is too slow. So basically, do you think we can use the X5000 every day, or X1000, something like powerful NG, almost every day, or we need some software to or some updates to use it? Yeah, at the evening after work.
Well, I think, I mean, yes, I certainly use mine every day. If this was to be my primary machine, I think from what I've talked with the community, I think we all have about the same wants. It would be nice to have a better browser. Odyssey works quite well. I certainly admire anybody who develops one of these. I know there's been several different attempts, but if we had a truly up-to-date web browser that supported more of the latest technologies with security, with different websites, that's probably number one. Number two would be to get a decent Office suite, and I know LibreOffice is in the works. You get that, just like a Linux machine, you're pretty much 90% of the way there with today's modern computing. That gets you to where you need to go. I would like to see better printer support, but that's just because of the kind of work I do. I have to print quite a bit. Unfortunately, I know some people don't anymore.
So there's a tip maybe from use Google Print Cloud, it's called. I'm using this. So I register my printer. This is Wi-Fi printer, like every now, I think. And you register on the Google, and then you can send through this web page. You can send, or I put the links. You can send PDF you can make on your Amiga, and it's done, and you can print it.
Perfect. I will be giving that a shot, because that's one thing I couldn't figure out how to do, is to print on this, and it's on my list of things to try. So I'll give that a try for sure, because that's one of the missing pieces. But yeah, really, a browser, a better browser, a better Office suite. You could then use this as your primary computer if you wanted to for most things. I play simple games anymore because my time is so limited. I don't have time for the consoles or anything anymore, as much as I would like to. But so the kind of games that come out on Amiga are perfect. I can spend 15 minutes and have some fun and walk away from it. So yeah, that would get me to the point where I could use my Amiga for work, even when I'm not traveling on the road where I would need a laptop. I spend a lot of time in Office, and I spend a lot of time on the web. So that would finish it up for me. Okay,
and sounds good. But one question, another thing, because we were talking about the new stuff here, and you were mentioning the theme of old software and how it's to use it when you have no experience, because some old software from Classic is working, let's say, natively in the system, and some through emulation. And how you discover it, or do you use some classic software from Amiga good days?
Yeah, I've played with a little bit of that, and really, a lot of it's trial and error. I do a lot of, honestly, just Google searching to find programs and even some of the games that people loved back in the day, because I didn't experience many of them due to the fact that I didn't own an Amiga at the time. So I try some of the applications to see if it'll run natively, and I've had some success with that. Some where it just doesn't seem to do anything, and I can't even tell you. I tried like an old word processor or some kind. I can't remember what it was, and it wouldn't even launch. I don't know what that was. But some of the games I've tried that I've wanted to play, even some that come on the machine with the OS, like the old CinemaWare games, and I used to play them on the Commodore 64. Obviously, the Amiga versions were much, much better, and I never had a chance to experience them. So, I think that the little run in UAE launcher on the next generation Amiga works quite well, at least with the limited version I have. Now, maybe you can help me with this one, but what I found is I don't know how to turn off one of those old classic programs or to shut down Run UAE if there is a way. So I usually end up in one of those games and I play it, and then I have to hit the power button to get out.
I don't remember. There is information in the documentation for this, and the documentation I think you can find on your system partition, but it's I think Control Shift Q or something like this combination, or this is in my book, but I'm not using this too much, or something like this. So from the left side for sure, yeah, left shift and control, this combination, and the letter Q. So this is then Perfect. You can quit. So it's working. Yeah, no problem.
Wonderful. I'll be trying that as well. Yeah, so I do think that trying some of the classic software, at least the few things that I've tried, it's been fun. I do like retro computers. It's why I obviously picked this up in the first place. It's kind of that blend of next generation technology and modern technology, along with the retro world that I do like as well. I mean, obviously I still have Commodore 64s, so I will continue to play with more of the older software just to kind of learn about it and finally get to experience some of those old games that I wanted to play that I never did because I didn't have an Amiga at the time. And it's easier and kind of more fun to do it on a so-called real Amiga as opposed to just doing it on emulation on a Windows PC.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so because I was as well thinking if our companies or the fathers of the Amiga, new Amiga like Trevor, can they use this retro good wave to promote Amiga? And do you think we can get more guys like you or how we can get these guys to be involved in community and the Amiga OS?
I actually think that is a fantastic idea. Obviously I got into it really. I mean, the retro computing aspect was a big factor in that because it was descendant from a computer I knew about that came from a company I cared about. But retro computing and retro gaming is big right now. Nintendo should be a good model for that. They released that little console that has all the old, like 30 or 60 Nintendo games in it, and you can't buy them. They're sold out worldwide. Now, obviously, the Amiga next generation machines are expensive. I think if they get the Tabor board out, the X1222 or whatever they're going to call it. Yeah. If they can get that out, and it's going to be a few $100 US. I don't know what it'll be on the European
more or less it
price
will be
range.
The same. Only the currency will be different, but the numbers will be the same.
Yeah, I've heard some different numbers on that, and that sounds very, very affordable. They should definitely target that. They should go after people that are interested in retro computing that don't want to buy an old machine. There's problems with buying an old machine, and in the Amiga world, one of the reasons that kept me away from it, besides the complexity that I talked about and trying to maintain it and fix it, is the price. I don't know anybody here in Utah, which is where I live here in the United States, that has one for sale. I can go on eBay, but the prices on eBay for a classic Amiga, you're looking at $500, $600, $700 anyway. Well, if I could buy a brand new machine for the same price, I think there's a market for that, and I think they could get more users onto next generation if they specifically target that market, and that market does exist. It is there.
Okay, this is good. Nice. Nice words, I think, because I was thinking about this, but if you say there is market, so maybe this is something like this, because, for example, maybe this will be a good example. When we take the Tabor, it's 400 euros should be in Europe, more or less. So the Vampire, I think you heard about this, for 500 or something, it's 300 euros.
Right.
And for Vampire you must buy the Amiga 500 and some other stuff, and from Tabor you must buy housing and some other stuff. So basically will be probably the same price, but here you will have really new hardware, and maybe you can use it more every day than the classic, because I have Vampire, so you cannot surf the web with this because it's not possible.
Right.
And I forgot what I would like to say. Okay, but maybe one more thing. You mentioned that maybe you will do some programming work. So, if yes, in which language, for example? And why not Hollywood, for example?
Well, I've looked at Hollywood, and I might definitely go down that path. Honestly, like I mentioned, I haven't programmed in a long time. I do, or did, I should say, know how to program in C and C++ a little bit, and I know that you can do that on the Amiga. Mm-hmm. So I might look to start there. Hollywood looks really promising, and I know that that's what a lot of people do use today to build applications and some of the games even. So that is something I'm gonna take a look at. Obviously, and I think Trevor Dickinson has said it many times that content is important. Getting applications on the machine, and I'm certainly not going to be releasing commercial software anytime soon, but I think it'll be fun to learn how to program on it, and maybe if I figure it out, I can contribute something at some point in the future. So I'm definitely going to look into it a little bit, and just get me an excuse to get back into programming a little bit. So it'll be fun.
Yeah, nice. This is really great because I have the plan to learn Hollywood. For now, I'm used this designer, so for the lazy guys.
Right.
But it's great as well, and maybe soon I will release even player for my podcast that I made in designer, but still is in beta tests. But basically you can do some software, simple software without coding knowledge. So amazing. So I think it's worth to try the Hollywood, the whole package.
Right.
Okay, good. So I think more or less we know everything, how the new guy is coming to our community, but do you have any plans to visit parties like AmiUS, because you are based in US, so AmiUS of course is big country. But
actually,
maybe you want to visit them, or in Europe or something.
Yes, actually, I was hoping to go to AmiWest this year because now I have a machine. I've watched videos from AmiWest on YouTube. That's one of the ways I was following the community for the last year or so, just to see what they were doing and what the story was with the X5000 and the Tabor board. Unfortunately, they've moved the AmiWest show this year to, I think it's the third weekend in October, instead of the first weekend in October, which it's been the last couple of years. And my company goes to a major trade show at that same weekend every year, so I will have to miss it this year. But I do plan on going to some Amiga conference as soon as I can. If I can't do Amiga West this year, I'll try to go next year. And yes, I love coming to Europe, so I'm going to keep an eye events there and see if I can't time something in the future for that as well. Those are not as easy to get to for me, but you never know. I'd love to get up there sometime and hang out with the community up there as well.
Yeah, this is good. In Europe, basically, it's bigger community, and in US, this was, I think, extraordinary to have the Amiga, and now it's really extreme to use this machine.
Exactly.
Cool. Okay. Do you have any questions, maybe, or to me, or I can say something more about the Amiga if you have some questions? Or
I don't think so right now. I'm going to continue to ask questions on the forums and so forth, just to learn more about this. I'm looking forward to your book coming out, just to see what else I can play with on the operating system itself. But no, you've already answered a couple of my questions already, so that's fantastic. I appreciate it.
No problem. You can always email me or something, so I can. But now maybe you, not everybody.
Right. Now that's one thing. I mean, I kind of mentioned it before, but the community has been wonderful. I know that those are the people that listen to your podcast as well. I've been listening to you for a while, but it was one of the things that got me into it. I mean, just besides the hardware, but the group is very fun. They're passionate about them. It's interesting to hear some of the little. Some of the talks of people, fighting about what platform is better, classic, next generation.
No, this is
MorphOS, but
bad. This is bad for us.
Yeah, I'd stay out of that. It's like whatever. I mean, everybody's going to have their thing, but for the most part, everybody's been really, really great and really helpful and a lot of fun to talk to. So, I'd say everybody keep that up, and hopefully I'll be one of the people that'll be helping people soon.
Of course, this is the matter of time. It's really no problem. But maybe because you said that you tried MorphOS, and have you tried the AROS? So this open source, free, cheap alternative, and it's not so popular at the end of all. And this is very strange.
That was the first thing I tried before I even did MorphOS, and I guess the problem with it is that it doesn't run on a lot of hardware. I did get it to work in a virtual machine package.
Yep.
I never got very far with it. It probably because I didn't understand how the Amiga worked. It was a lot more hands-on to try to figure out how to get stuff to run on it. It took me a while to even get the screen resolution right. So it's people who probably came from Amiga and have played with that can probably get it to work, and there's certainly a lot of hard work going into that. And I do know there's a lot of cross work that people do work on all three platforms, and I think that's also a good thing. The more people put into any of these, the better. But I didn't get very far with AROS. It just it was just a little bit too much for me to figure out, at least at the time I played with it. It's probably improved since the last time I tried that too.
Mm-hmm. I tried a lot of AROS, and this is the Icarus desktop, this version of, because I don't have so old PC or something that is running natively, so it was okay, but there's a lot of it looks like it's not finished for me, so maybe that's why is the problem. It's not so popular because it's the enter step is quite big to jump over it than I think in other Amiga operating systems. But
and the Icarus one was actually the best one that I tried, but it's been a little while, and I have tried some of the other, even the classic derivatives like the
Vision,
AmiKit or whatever.
AmiKit,
yeah, and that guy's done great work too. That's pretty fun to play with. So I have that running on my PC. But it's not quite the same as firing up the X5000 and using it natively.
Yeah, this is completely different. But I think you can, you can take some ideas from AmiKit or take a look under the hood how it's done. For example, directory Opus 5 configuration is quite advanced there. So you can check it and what is setup files, how everything is connected, because this you can take let's say copy, or
right.
So basically some stuff of this. But I would like ask you, maybe because you said that you are familiar with Windows, you work with computers, and it's maybe boring, but what do you think about our PowerPC world? Because this is the advantage and disadvantage for us, because the problems of Odyssey and drivers and so on is this big Indian issues and so on. And do you have any things or thoughts about PowerPC and our life with this platform?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the challenge with PowerPC, and I went through it when I first started with the Mac, was the same issue, and they had a lot more resources to deal with. Mm-hmm. There's nothing wrong with the PowerPC architecture. It's actually, very powerful and has a lot of pluses over even the x86 architecture. And without getting too computer science-y here on this, but I think the challenge these days is that the PowerPC platform, for the most part, has kind of faded out of existence. It's there isn't anybody mainstream using it anymore. I mean, once Apple stopped using it, you had a couple of the Sony and Microsoft were using it for their last generation consoles that kept it going for a while. For the same reasons. It actually has a lot of powerful functionality and features. But they don't do that anymore either. So now you're dealing with specialty hardware. Some of the military uses it. There's some special equipment that uses PowerPC. Mm-hmm. So I know that's the challenge that people like Trevor at AmigaOne and others have, is that they have to order these custom chips from, I guess they're going to Freescale these days. That was the problem with the X1000, is they couldn't get enough of the chips cheaply because Apple bought the company that was making them.
Yep.
Freescale makes PowerPC chips. That's what's in the X5000. I don't know what chip is going to be in the Tabor, but either way, they're expensive. They're not mainstream. You have to get them. So it's a challenge for the hardware makers, which obviously makes it cost prohibitive for the users. It would be great if, and in some ways, if they could port all of this to x86. And I know some people will scream at that because of the whole rivalry between PowerPC and x86. But x86 hardware is just more readily available.
Yeah.
But there's challenges with that. To truly port Amiga OS over to PowerPC and then port all of the software over to that is a monumental task, especially when you're not dealing with large corporations. I don't see that happening. So there's no limitations in this PowerPC architecture from a speed and performance standpoint. So those that are looking to get into next generation Amiga should not be afraid of PowerPC. It's just the cost and the difficulties that companies like AmigaOne have to go through to get the hardware. But it is available. They are obviously able to get parts, and they're all brand new. Freescale still makes these. So it's not an issue today. It could become an issue in the future if it becomes harder and harder to get PowerPC-based chips. I don't know what will happen to the next generation market. So the community needs to figure that out. And obviously AROS is one approach to porting some of the pieces over. So we shouldn't, as a community, discount any of the operations or attempts to to move it forward. X86 is something people need to keep in mind.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so maybe the last, the last really now the last, because you say that you are traveling a lot or something like this. You need the laptop at your work, and it would be nice that when we have the Amiga OS on the notebook or something, but probably you are familiar with Alice project, but I'm talking about the real PowerPC notebook, yeah?
Yes, if we had next generation, true Amiga OS 4.1 on a laptop, I would certainly buy one. I think it'd be a lot of fun to take that around with me and use it on the road. It'd be fun to show my coworkers that I'm using a computer very different from what they have. So I would be totally on board with that. And I know that's been something that the community's wanted for a long time. I would be interested in an Alice laptop just because it gets you close, but obviously what you're really dealing with there is the classic flavor really emulated. So you're looking at versions of Amiga OS 3.1, whether it's the AmiKit enhancement versions or the original true classic versions, and then obviously it'll run the emulated OS 4.1 Classic Edition as well, which I would imagine it runs about as well as it does on the Windows emulator, so it's probably slow and not very functional. So really what you're looking at with Alice is running the old software, which is fine. I would probably buy one just for something to play with, to be a toy. But that's not something you could use in its true Amiga sense as a daily computer. You'd have to boot it into Windows, which I know that machine supports, to do any real work. And I know it does some tricks with the whole rabbit hole feature and stuff, but having a true next generation Amiga laptop would be great. But PowerPC causes a lot of limitations with that. So I don't know where they're going with that. It was a problem for Apple. That's why Apple got out of PowerPC, is they couldn't get the right kind of chips for laptops. So I imagine it's cost prohibitive and difficult for really a hobby market like we have with the Amiga to try to build a notebook off of a PowerPC processor these days.
Okay, yeah, I think so. This is not so nice, but it's the life.
It's the reality we're in, unfortunately.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so at the end of this, like every show, you can say something nice to our community. Say thank you. Probably you would like to say thank you to our forums and so on. So, and then we can say goodbye to everybody.
Sure. I'd really just like to thank you for the opportunity to to talk to you. It was one of the ways I got into this in the first place was buying your first book on emulation, which was awesome.
Thanks.
Yeah, but definitely thanks to the rest of the people in the community as well. There's been a lot of people that Amiga.org are the ones that I hang out with the most just because of time. I don't do a lot of board bouncing, but people out there have been really, really great. And those people know who they are. They answer all my questions whenever I ask them, and I try to participate in the conversations. And also people on the IRC chat rooms, on the Amiga boards. I hang out on there during the day when I'm in my free time, so that's kind of fun as well. And definitely to Aaron up on at Amiga on the Lake. It's great having a U.S.-based Amiga store that I can buy my computer from and buy software and other products from right here in the United States without having to try to worry about trying to import from Europe, which is fine. I do that on my Commodore stuff all the time, but it's certainly easier to ship across the country as opposed to international. It's cheaper for one.
At the Vault, I think the guy did this work, and And it's great because a lot of people was saying this is not possible, that make no sense. Amiga NG and not only classic shop is hard, and AmigaNG to open such a shop in US when the community is really small, it's not possible. But it's if you want, looks like everything is possible. Huh?
It is, and certainly it's not his day job. And those guys have a real job to go to during the day, and I think they have a couple of other companies, or at least one other company that they run. But certainly you can start up these days online. You can start up an online store. They've certainly invested a lot of time and money and inventory, but it is possible, and it's hopefully they can bring more users, especially U.S.-based users, into the community. The U.S. has not been a strong Amiga spot really forever. It wasn't big. It wasn't as big in the United States as it was in Europe. You can trace that back to probably Commodore's fault, and there's plenty of documentaries on that out there already. But I had friends who had Amigas, so they were certainly for sale and available here, but not as popular. So I'm hoping that he can grow the Amiga community here in the United States at least a little bit, and help contribute worldwide too. I mean, it's we're all in this together, and it's been fun.
Yep. And one question, the last one, because about this shop, I was thinking, but when I take a look on this story, for example, do you think, because I think like this, in Amiga world, I think it's much more easier to do something or to be, I don't know, known or to produce something impressive, because we are quite small, and it's easier to be active in small market than do something in mainstream that you will be one of the thousands of guys that doing exactly the same thing. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. It's definitely a hobbyist market, and it's hobbyists are the ones using these machines. You don't buy a next generation Amiga because it's cheap or it's mainstream. You do it because you want to, and the people that are running businesses, even Trevor from AmigaOne obviously is doing it because he loves it, not because he's making a lot of money on it. I'm sure the guy the two guys from Amiga on the Lake aren't making any money on it. I think they hope to break even to essentially pay for their hobby. And maybe make a little bit of money on it, which is great. And the same thing with the programmers. There's people who are, writing software for this computer, not because they're going to, make a lot of money or get rich, but because it's fun. They can contribute and be known, like you mentioned, in the community because there's so few of them. You're not getting drowned out by a bunch of big companies. It's truly a fan-based market right now, which is part of the fun, and if people can make a little bit of money doing it and see some benefit to their efforts, that's great. I mean, obviously you spend a lot of time on your books, that takes time and effort, but you do it because you like it.
Yep, there's no money at the end of all the cost of prints and so on. So when you go on the zero is cool at the end of all.
Right.
But
exactly.
we are doing this for fun. You have right, yeah. Even this podcast is for fun, yeah.
Right, and that stuff all takes time and effort. So, I know the community appreciates what you do and what these other companies and people do. It keeps us informed. It keeps the market going, and like me, it has the potential to bring new users into the hobby and into the machine, and that makes it fun. So, it's fun. I enjoy it.
Okay, so now, thank you very much for your time. It was a pleasure to meet you, and especially that you are new Amiga guy. First after, 20 years, so amazing.
Yes, well, no problem. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Bye-bye. Take care.
Goodbye.
It was AMIcast, podcast for all Amiga users.